This hour on I-24 News. President Trump issues a final ultimatum as he keeps the Iran nuclear deal alive for now. Plus, the United Nations report says what the Trump administration has been saying all along. Houthi rebels in Yemen are using weapons from Iran. Also, more Palestinian protests as the PLO plots a response to President Trump's Jerusalem declaration. And why the next target for pro-Russian hackers could be the United States Senate.
From the I-24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clear Cut with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The Iran nuclear deal survives, but for how long? 3 times now, President Trump has waived the sanctions and kept the Obama administration's deal in place. An agreement Mr. Trump called the worst deal ever back when he ran for president. So here's what's different this time. The Trump administration has slapped new sanctions against individuals and institutions behind the violent crackdown on anti-government protests in Iran. The president also issued an ultimatum. The nuclear deal must be fixed or he will not renew it again. Well, we've got reports from the United Nations and Washington tonight. Let's start with our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv. Dan, should we believe President Trump when he says this is the last time he's staying in this nuclear deal?
Good evening, Michelle. In a statement, the president says, "Do not doubt my word." He adds that if America's allies in Europe take Iran's side by refusing to change the terms of the nuclear deal, then they are supporting Iran's ambition eventually to have nuclear weapons. That's quite a charge. So he's insisting that Britain, France, Germany, also Russia and China should modify the terms. Also, that Congress has 3 months until the next deadline for certifying the deal or not. Congress has 3 months in order to pass a law or change a law that provides oversight for the nuclear deal. Experts in the administration say a major problem is that key terms of the deal sunset, meaning that in either 10 years or 12 years, depending on the paragraph, they actually expire. Opponents of the deal have said that's a very dangerous thing. The president is insisting that the sunset be eliminated. A big question is whether the European allies will listen. Also, will Congress find the time to do what Trump wants in the next 3 months? Michelle?
And Dana, there were some new sanctions imposed against Iran. Tell us about those.
Yes, that's absolutely a strong part of the story. While the president is letting the nuclear deal continue, he wanted to make it clear, well, as we reported on I-24 News just yesterday, we know what you're doing. That's the Trump administration message to the Iranian regime. So the president decided to ban any business connection with people such as Iran's top judicial official, and there are even sanctions against a prison in Iran because of human rights abuses, including the torture of political dissidents, some of them recently arrested during the protests. There are also new sanctions aimed at Iranians and companies that are involved in smuggling parts for weapons systems to Iran. The president wants to make it really clear the United States is an enemy of the Islamic Republic of Iran, notwithstanding the survival for now of the nuclear deal. Michelle?
Dan, thanks so much. Dan Raviv live in Washington, D.C. Let's now go to the United Nations and our senior diplomatic correspondent, Nina Larson. Nina, there's a big emphasis on Iran's human rights abuses by the Trump administration. How is Iran likely to react?
Well, this is all happening, Michelle, you're quite right, against the backdrop of those demonstrations. The pictures that people have seen around the world of ordinary people in Iran protesting against the regime. There hasn't been a specific immediate reaction from the Iranian regime yet. We'll expect that in the coming days. They're not going to be happy with this, of course. And one aspect of these new announcements that they will not be happy with is that they actually target senior figures in the regime for the first time. Among them, the brother of the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Ali Larijani. He is the head of the judiciary, and he is the official that is in charge of imprisoning people and people are really accusing them of human rights abuses. We see people rounded up in Iran. We see even dual nationals being detained for sometimes years at a time. There are still American citizens inside Iran that have not been released as part of any kind of deal. And this focus on human rights is something that Nikki Haley here at the United Nations has been very much focused on. So we can expect some more action to be brought back here.
Yeah, absolutely. Nina, what about Iran's covert weapons market? Entities tied to weapons and missile manufacturing also targeted. How does this impact the Iran deal itself?
Well, it does impact it. It might not seem, Michelle, that the two are immediately related, but we have to remember it's not just the Iran nuclear deal between the key powers in Europe and China and Russia and the United States. There's also a very strong international aspect. The UN, it was all enshrined in a UN resolution around the time of the deal in 2015, and that resolution went a bit further than the nuclear program. It also examined Iran's ballistic missile program, and it outright banned their transfer of weapons. And Nikki Haley has some more leverage now on that. There's a UN report that's due out any day now, and I've seen a leak of this report, and it squarely blames the Iranians on supplying arms to Houthi rebels in Yemen. And that's something that Nikki Haley has been trying to bring to the fore for a long time.
Nina, European diplomats, the other parties signed on to this deal. They were warning the president not to pull out. What kind of reaction have we had from them?
Well, again, no surprise for the Europeans in this. They've been lobbying very, very strongly over the past several days and weeks, Michelle, as late as yesterday, a real 11th hour appeal from key foreign ministers in Brussels from the nations that signed on to this deal, saying they want to keep the deal intact and calling for unity. The Iranian foreign minister also in Brussels yesterday, joining his counterparts. Iran very, very concerned. Again, we haven't had an immediate reaction from the European bloc, but there's probably some quite close coordination between Washington and key European diplomats on all of this. They're all in it together, and tremendous pressure now on Europe to really rein in Iran's activities across the region.
All right. Thanks for that update, Nina Lawson. Joining me now is Ryan Mauro, national security analyst for the Clarion project. Ryan, thanks for being with us. Ryan, President Trump saying that this is the last chance to fix this deal before the U.S. pulls out. Do you see the other parties to this deal stepping up and working on fixing it?
Well, they're going to have to. So, yes, I think an attempt will be made by the political forces within the U.S. I think that Europe is definitely going to try to make some type of accommodation, at least in regards to ballistic missile development. But I must say that Trump's response here is measured, and under normal circumstances, I would say that's okay to give it another 120 days so that we can try to work something out. But here's the thing. These aren't normal circumstances. We have the Iranian people rising up in a very dramatic, special way inside of Iran. And so I hear this news about waiving the sanctions, even if there were some sanctions on a limited number of entities going along with the announcement. And I've got to think about the message it sends to both the Iranian regime and the Iranian people. And what it says is that the U.S. cares more about the nuclear issue than the fate of the Iranian people. So the Iranian regime is going to calculate, saying in the future, if they want to deter American support for the Iranian opposition, then the card they have to play is nuclear weapons.
Well, Ryan, many of the sanctions imposed outside the deal were in direct response to these protests, to human rights abuses that were taking place during these protests. You don't think that that sent a strong message of support to those Iranian people?
Not really. Now, they're aware of what we are capable of in terms of sanctions as well as covert operations. Remember years ago when there were all these accidents like every other week happening in Iran targeting the nuclear program. The Iranian people understand we can do the same for them. But when it comes to sanctions, like the Iranian Central Bank, which funds the Revolutionary Guards Corps, which kills the Iranian protesters and tortures them, that's not sanctioned. So very important things are not sanctioned right now.
You think this will extract the wind out of the sails of these protests, that because of the U.S.'s reaction here, they may die down?
No, because the Iranian regime has told its people that those who have engaged in the protests are going to pay the heaviest price. And so facing torture, possible death, is quite the motivator to make you win. But still, it's very important for us to give momentum and a sense of international attention and support to the movement inside of Iran, and every dollar counts. I want to deprive the regime of every dollar they use to support terrorism, which they spend $16 billion a year on, and every dollar to a salary of one of those police officers that are used to crush the democratic aspirations of the Iranian people. By the way, a few years ago, Iran was paying Taliban terrorists to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan only $580 a month. So when I say every dollar counts, I mean it.
Ryan, no doubt that Iran is an aggressive sponsor of terrorism, and that nuclear deal, giving them the money up front, certainly helps them to fulfill that aim. But what would you have liked the president to do then, if not let it go for the next 3 months?
Sanction them every single way possible, begin an information warfare campaign where he's tweeting every single day, assign someone to have his Twitter account and get 2 tweets a day about Iran. And you will see the protests increase every single day.
You think the protesters are responding to his Twitter diplomacy? You think they're reading those tweets?
Yes.
It's encouraging them?
Yes. The tweets of the President of the United States can break through any information blockade. They cannot be ignored. They cannot be hidden from any population.
Ryan, what are the chances that we get those fixes from the Europeans, and what could those fixes include?
I think they're likely to focus on the ballistic missile element of it, because there have been some indications from Iran that they might be willing to budge in that direction. But when it comes to the key issues of the Iran deal, I don't think Iran is going to budge, particularly when it comes to the issue of inspections and how the IAEA inspectors won't even request access to certain sites if they think the Iranians will say no. So it's a good deal for the Iranian regime, not just for their nuclear weapons aspirations, but for their survival. The regime has said that they expect to get $200 to $300 billion in foreign investment as a result of these sanctions not being in place. That's a lot of money. And by the way, when the Europeans talk, they're not just thinking about national security. They are thinking about all the cash that their companies are going to make.
It's certainly a sweet deal for Iran. Ryan Mauro, thank you so much, national security analyst for the Clarion Project. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, coming up on the show, a pivotal weekend for the Palestinians. What to expect from a landmark meeting of the group's feuding factions. And more violent clashes in the West Bank and Gaza. What defense forces are saying about these new demonstrations.